Hello everyone, my name is Farai Dando and welcome to my fourth presentation on the Kazakhstan Watch. So today, as I mentioned in my last presentation, I'm going to be talking about the green energy policy within Kazakhstan. And of course, by policy, I'm referring to political and economic policy that has been put in place by, by the government. So Kazakhstan, as you'll see from some of the facts that I'll present, is committed to developing green energy alternatives. And this is despite the fact that they have very large reserves of fossil fuels like coal and oil, which we discussed previously. And part of this commitment can be seen in their commitment or their involvement in the Kyoto Convention. And to tell you a little bit about the Kyoto Convention, um, it was actually a UN framework convention on climate change, and Kazakhstan ratified the Kyoto Protocol in 2009. And um, the convention was adopted at the United Nations headquarters in New York in May of 1992, in accordance with Article 20 of the United Nations. It was open for signature at the Rio de Janeiro from the 4th to the 14th of June of 1992, and thereafter the United Nations headquarters in New York from the 20th of June 1992 to 19th of June of 1993. By that time, the convention had received 166 signatures. The objective of the treaty was to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. Now let's get into some of the specific policies within the country. So recently, the Astana Times on May of 2016 uh, had an article on an announcement made by the Ministry of Energy, which and they actually introduced new renewable energy auctions. So these are special auctions, and what they announced was that the ministry plans to use the special auctions to purchase renewable energy from energy producing companies. The auctions are meant to bring transparency to the selection process and increase effectiveness of technologies and also minimize the influence of tariffs. Now let's look at the law of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Uh, First, some of the guiding principles on the use of renewable energy sources is the recovery of energy from continuing environmental processes. The renewable energy source mean energy sources which are continually renewed through an ongoing natural process, such as solar installation, hydrodynamic water energy for the plants of up to 35 megawatts, geothermal energy, which is warm earth groundwater, rivers, and ponds. Also biomass, which includes biogas and other organic waste used for generation of electricity. So the main idea of the state policy is the creation of energy using renewable energy sources as an integral part that will grow from year to year. So it is something that they expect. The idea is it is something that should be self-sustaining, and they're able to continue using it and develop the resource. So this is actually a highlight of the regulatory institutions within Kazakhstan as far as energy is concerned. So the Ministry of Energy is more or less oversees all the um, other state departments, except for from that list, CREED, which is actually a nonprofit non-governmental service. However, they are still sponsored by the government through government grants. Um, so in 2013, the government adopted a new law supporting the use of renewable energy technology. This new law actually is known as the Energy Efficiency 2020, and they put a huge investment in it, and the cost of the program is estimated at about 5.3 billion euros. Um, so it aims to install about 1,040 megawatt renewable energy capacity by 2020, which includes about 793 megawatts from wind, 170 megawatts from hydro, and 4 megawatts from solar. And some of the features of this Energy Efficiency 2020 uh, policy is that it provides incentives to invest in renewable sources, which are actually, on some of them, it's up to 50% compensation for grid losses for energy companies or energy operators. And also, these operators do not pay for transmission services, and they also obtain complementary access to grid power. And keep in mind that all the grids are currently owned by the state corporation. So they currently own, operate, and maintain the grids. In addition to that, they also have grants up to 30% of project costs that are related to the actual land that these companies would be using. Foreign investors also get tax deductions, and they're also eliminating licensing fees for producing renewable energy, all as part of this um, legislation policy. So Kazakhstan Vision 2050. Um, the goal of the Vision 2050, and this is all within their renewable energy uh, policy, is they've created this legal framework, and one of the things that they're trying to achieve is they're trying to meet the obligations for the Kyoto Protocol to reduce carbon emissions by 15%, and this is by the year 2020, and 25% by 2050 compared to 1992 levels. And 1992, if you remember from my first presentation, is relevant because this is the time when this was the peak of their um, emissions. The economy was growing. They achieved their independence in 1991. So they're, in a sense, they were a brand new country. However, once they achieved their independence from the Soviet Union, they experienced a lot of growth, population growth, a large demand in energy. And so as a result of that, and of course, the majority of this energy was coming from coal and oil, and they're exporting a lot of it. So there was a lot of fossil fuels that they were using for transportation. They were using it also for within the manufacturing processes, and they'll also and to produce electricity for the most part they were using coal. So this was the height of their emissions or carbon emissions at that time. So 1992 is relevant because of that. So they've set it as a standard or um, as a turning point, I guess, to kind of compare, and they use this to set their goals on what they want to achieve for reducing carbon emissions. So they have this new legal framework set in place to achieve this goal. So with this in mind, we have to look at what are some of the trends and what are some of the barriers with all the investment that they put in, um, and with the time and the new legislation and the commitment that they've made to the international community. What are some of the barriers that have been affecting or that is affecting the development of energy production within Kazakhstan, especially when it comes to this refocus that they're putting on renewable energy. So I'll be discussing that in my next presentation. However, this brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to watch.